My name is Amber Mitchell. I'm 28 years old, and last month I watched my stepmother, Patricia, block me from my own father's funeral. Dad was my best friend after my mom passed away. Patricia made sure I couldn't say goodbye, and when she stopped me from attending the will reading with that sly little smile saying, "This meeting is only for heirs named in the will," she had no idea what I was carrying in my purse. The lawyer opened my file, and Patricia went as pale as a ghost. If you've ever dealt with toxic family members trying to steal what's rightfully yours, hit that like button and subscribe. I'd love to know where you're watching from in the comments below, as I share how I fought for my father's true wishes. My dad, Robert Mitchell, was my anchor in this world. After my mom died of breast cancer when I was 15, it was just me and him against the world. He was a successful real estate developer in Boston. Having built his company from the ground up after graduating college, Dad was a hard worker, but he always made time for me. Every Sunday morning, we had our special tradition. We'd sail his small boat in Boston Harbor when the weather allowed, and then we'd get brunch at our favorite spot, where we'd talk for hours. He'd listen to my teenage problems with the patience of a saint, offering wisdom that seemed to grow even more valuable as I got older. "Amber," he'd say, "always trust your gut. Your mother had the best instincts I've ever known, and you got that from her." When I was 19 and a sophomore in college, Dad met Patricia at a charity event. She was attractive, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in him. I was happy for Dad. After 4 years of grieving Mom, he deserved a little happiness. But Patricia came with baggage. She had 2 children, Mason, who was 17 at the time, and Lindsay, who was 15. From our very first meeting, something felt off. Their smiles were a little too wide, their laughs at Dad's jokes a little too loud, and their eyes lingered a little too long on the expensive furniture in our home. Still, I tried. I really did. I invited Lindsay for coffee and tried to talk to Mason about his college plans. Dad was falling head over heels for Patricia, and I wanted to support his happiness. "They just need some time to warm up," Dad assured me when I mentioned the coldness I felt from them. "They lost their father too, you know." Well, not exactly. He'd walked out on them, which might be worse. The wedding happened quickly, just 6 months after they met. I stood by Dad's side as his best woman, forcing a smile as Patricia recited vows of honesty and devotion that somehow rang hollow in my ears. The changes happened immediately after they moved into our home. Photographs of my mother, which had always held places of honor, began to disappear, replaced by portraits of Patricia and her children. Family heirlooms were rearranged or put into storage to make way for Patricia's modern tastes. Our Sunday brunches dwindled. At first, Patricia would create convenient conflicts. "Oh, Robert, you forgot the Andersons are coming over today." Or, "Mason has a game, and we should all be there as a family to support him." When we did manage to get our father-daughter time, Patricia would call repeatedly with manufactured emergencies. She once called 8 times because she couldn't find the spare key to the vacation house, only for Dad to come home and find it exactly where it had always been. Meanwhile, Mason and Lindsay treated my father's home and money like their birthright. Mason wrecked 2 cars in his first year of driving, and Dad replaced them without a complaint. Lindsay maxed out her credit card on shopping sprees, and my father quietly paid the bills. I chose a different path. Though my father offered to pay for my tuition and living expenses, I insisted on working my way through college. I took out modest student loans and worked part-time jobs, not because I didn't appreciate my father's generosity, but because I valued my independence. "You're so stubborn, just like your mother," Dad would say with a proud smile. She never wanted a handout either. After graduating with a marketing degree, I landed a job at a tech company in Seattle. The distance was hard, but we kept our relationship close with daily phone calls and monthly visits. During those visits, I noticed subtle changes in my father. He seemed tired, less vibrant. When I'd voice my concern, Patricia would cut in, "He's fine, Amber, stop being so dramatic. It's just age slowing him down a bit." Over the last year, Dad's health declined more rapidly. He developed heart problems, and his once sturdy frame grew thin. During my visits, I noticed his medication seemed to change frequently, and he often seemed disoriented. On my last visit, 3 months ago, Dad asked Patricia to give us some privacy. When she reluctantly left the room, he squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Amber, I need to tell you something important," he whispered, glancing at the door. "I've been making changes, setting things right. If anything happens to me, you talk to Eleanor at the office. She has something for you." Patricia returned before he could explain further, carrying a glass of water and Dad's pills. "Time for your medicine, Robert," she said sweetly, but her eyes were cold as they met mine. That was the last real conversation I had with my father. I called every day as always, but more and more often, Patricia would answer and say he was resting or couldn't come to the phone. When I did manage to speak with him, he sounded confused, his words slurred. I made plans to fly back to Boston the following month to see him in person, but I never got the chance. The call came on a Tuesday night. I was working late, finalizing a marketing campaign, when my phone buzzed with Mason's number. That was unusual. My stepbrother rarely contacted me directly. "Your dad's in the hospital," he said flatly. "Mom asked me to call you." My heart hammered in my chest. "What happened? Is he okay?" "Don't know the details. Mom just said to let you know he's at Boston General." He hung up before I could ask another question. I booked the first flight to Boston, a red-eye leaving in 3 hours. I threw clothes into a bag, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. The 5-hour flight felt like an eternity, my anxiety mounting with every passing minute. When I finally arrived at Boston General Hospital at 7 a.m., I rushed to the information desk. "Robert Mitchell," I said, out of breath. "He was admitted last night. I'm his daughter." The receptionist directed me to the cardiac intensive care unit on the 4th floor. As the elevator doors opened, I saw Patricia and her children in the waiting area. Patricia was impeccably dressed, as always, not a hair out of place despite the supposed emergency. "Patricia, how is he? What happened?" I asked, rushing toward them. She stood up, positioning herself between me and the hallway leading to the patient rooms. "Amber, you didn't have to come all this way." "Of course I did. He's my father. I need to see him." Patricia's expression hardened. "The doctors are only allowing immediate family in right now. Robert needs his rest, not an emotional scene." It felt like a slap in the face. "I am his family. I'm his daughter." "The doctors were very specific," she insisted, her voice dripping with false compassion. "Family only for now. We'll call you if there are any changes." Lindsay smirked behind her mother, while Mason at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. I went to the nurse's station and explained that I was Robert Mitchell's daughter and needed to see him. The head nurse looked confused. "The patient's wife indicated his only children were already here," she said, glancing over at Patricia. "That's his wife, but I'm his daughter from his first marriage," I explained, my frustration building. "Please, I just need to see my dad." The nurse looked torn, caught in a family dispute she wanted no part of. "Let me speak with Mrs. Mitchell and the doctor," she said finally. I waited for hours. Patricia and her children were allowed in and out of Dad's room, while I was left in the waiting area. Finally, a doctor approached me. "Miss Mitchell, I understand there's some confusion about visitation." I explained the situation, and he listened sympathetically. "Your father is heavily sedated right now. His condition is serious but stable. We're monitoring his heart function. I'll allow a brief visit, but he likely won't be responsive." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As the doctor was leading me toward Dad's room, Patricia appeared and pulled him aside for a hushed conversation. When he returned, his demeanor had changed. "I apologize, but Mrs. Mitchell has informed me that your father explicitly stated he did not want any visitors from outside the household during this hospitalization. As his medical proxy, we have to respect her decisions regarding visitation." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That's not true. My father would never say that. Please, just 5 minutes." The doctor apologized again, but remained firm. Hospital security was called when I refused to leave the floor. Humiliated and heartbroken, I was escorted to the lobby. For the next 3 days, I tried everything. I showed up at different shift changes, hoping to find more sympathetic staff. I waited in the parking lot to catch doctors on their way out. I called the hospital administration. Nothing worked. Patricia had me completely blocked. On the fourth day, a nurse named Raquel approached me in the hospital cafeteria. "You're Robert Mitchell's daughter, right?" she asked quietly, sitting down at my table. "Yes. Have you been caring for him? How is he?" She glanced around before speaking. "I shouldn't be talking to you, but something about this situation just doesn't feel right. Your father has been asking for you." My heart leaped. "He's conscious?" Patricia told everyone he was in a coma. Raquel shook her head. "He has periods of consciousness. He's weak, but he's lucid at times. Yesterday, he specifically asked for his daughter, Amber." Tears welled in my eyes. "Can you help me see him?" "I'll try. I'm working tomorrow night. Come at 11 p.m. when visiting hours are over and the floor is quieter. I can't promise anything, but I'll try to get you in." I barely slept that night, clinging to the hope that I would finally see my father. But at 6 a.m., my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Miss Mitchell, this is Dr. Kaplan from Boston General. I'm sorry to inform you that your father passed away about an hour ago." The world stopped. "What? No, that can't be right. He was stable." "He suffered a major cardiac arrest in the early hours," the doctor said. "We attempted resuscitation, but we were unsuccessful. I'm very sorry for your loss." I never got to say goodbye. I never got to tell him I loved him one last time, and Patricia had made sure of it. The funeral arrangements were controlled entirely by Patricia. The service was held at an upscale funeral home, not the small chapel where my mother's service had been, the one my father always said he wanted for his own. When I arrived, an usher directed me to a seat in the very back, far from the family section where Patricia, Mason, and Lindsay sat in the front row. I watched as person after person approached them with condolences, many of them giving me confused looks. A few of my father's oldest friends made a point to come and sit with me or squeeze my shoulder in silent support. During her eulogy, Patricia painted herself as the devoted wife who had nursed my father through his illness. She spoke of their blended family, never once acknowledging me by name. When it was time for the viewing, Patricia's brother physically stood in my way. "Family first," he told me coldly. By the time I was allowed to approach, they were closing the casket. My last glimpse of my father was partial and rushed. At the reception afterward, I overheard Patricia speaking with a man I recognized as her lawyer, Gregory Harrison. "We'll proceed with the reading on Tuesday," he said. "I have all the paperwork in order." "Excellent," Patricia replied. "Robert was very specific about his wishes. Everything is settled exactly as it should be." The smug satisfaction in her voice made my stomach turn. I left the reception early, driving back to my hotel in a blur of tears. I had never felt so alone, so defeated. Dad was gone, and Patricia had won. She had managed to cut me out of his final days, and she was clearly confident about what was coming next. That night, I cried until I had no tears left. I had lost not only my father, but my last connection to the family I once knew. Little did I know, my father had anticipated Patricia's behavior and set a plan in motion that would change everything. 3 days after the funeral, I was still staying at a Hampton Inn near my childhood home. Unable to bring myself to fly back to Seattle, I had taken bereavement leave from work, but had no real plan. The emptiness inside me made it hard to think beyond each painful hour. A knock on my hotel room door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Patricia's allies had made it clear I wasn't welcome in Boston. When I opened the door, I found Eleanor Davis, my father's executive assistant of 15 years, standing there, looking nervous. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" She glanced down the hallway before answering. "Can I come in, Amber? I shouldn't be seen here." I stepped aside to let her in, my confusion temporarily replacing my grief. Eleanor had always been kind to me, though we were never particularly close. Once we were inside, she retrieved a parcel from her oversized handbag. It was a simple manila envelope, but its flap was sealed with a disc of red wax, impressed with my father's signet ring, the same one that had belonged to his grandfather. "Your father gave this to me 6 months ago," Eleanor explained, handing me the package. "He made me promise I would deliver it to you personally if anything happened to him. He was very specific. It was not to be sent by mail or courier, and no one else was to know of it. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. "Did he say what it was?" Eleanor shook her head. "Only that it was important, and that you would understand what to do." She glanced at her watch. "I have to go. Patricia has been at the office every day since your father passed, going through his files. She fired 2 people yesterday." After Eleanor left, I stared at the package, afraid of what it might contain, yet desperate to connect with my father one last time. Finally, I broke the wax seal and opened the envelope. Inside were 3 items: a handwritten letter on my father's personal letterhead, a sealed legal document marked with the logo of Harrington and Associates, which was not my father's usual law firm, and a small key taped to a card bearing the address of the First National Bank and the number of a safe deposit box. With shaking hands, I unfolded my father's letter. "My dearest Amber," it began, "if you are reading this, then my worst fears have come to pass. I am so sorry for the pain you must be feeling, and sorrier still that I cannot be there to comfort you. I made a terrible mistake in trusting Patricia. Over the last year, I've noticed disturbing patterns in her behavior, objects disappearing, documents being moved, medications making me feel worse instead of better, my oldest friends suddenly made to feel unwelcome in our own home. At first, I dismissed these concerns as paranoia, but then I found evidence that Patricia was in contact with her ex-husband, the one she claims abandoned her. The reality, I have discovered, is quite different. I updated my will 6 months ago with a new law firm. Patricia does not know about this. The enclosed document is a copy of this will, filed with the state. The key is to a safe deposit box containing evidence you may need if Patricia contests the will, as I suspect she will. It also contains personal items I wanted to ensure made their way to you. I had planned to confront Patricia once I had gathered enough proof, but my health has declined faster than I anticipated. I fear my time is running out. Remember that I love you, Amber. You were the greatest joy of my life. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you have become. With all my love, Dad." Tears streamed down my face as I read his words, a mixture of sorrow and a cold burn of vengeance rising within me. Dad had known. He had seen through Patricia's facade and had taken steps to protect me and his legacy. The sealed legal document was indeed a will, dated just 6 months prior and notarized by witnesses I didn't recognize. I didn't open it, leaving the official seal intact. The next morning, I went to the First National Bank. After verifying my identity and the key, the bank manager escorted me to the vault and left me in the privacy of a small viewing room with the safe deposit box. The box contained several items. First, another letter from my father explaining each piece of evidence. Then, there were photographs from a private investigator showing Patricia meeting with a man my father identified as her supposed ex-husband. There were also pictures of the same man visiting my father's house while he was away on business trips. More disturbing were the financial records, which showed unusual transfers from my father's personal accounts to offshore accounts linked to Patricia's brother. There were also copies of my father's medical charts, with handwritten notes questioning changes in his prescriptions that coincided with Patricia's trips to the pharmacy. A USB drive held audio recordings from my father's home office, capturing conversations between Patricia and her children, discussing how they would spend the inheritance after the old man was gone. In one particularly chilling recording, Patricia instructed her son, Mason, to make sure his father took all his medicine while she was away for the weekend. "Make sure he takes the blue pills first," she said. "They make him drowsy, so he won't fuss about the others." The final document was a handwritten timeline my father had created, tracking his declining health against Patricia's actions. He noted increased fatigue and confusion after Patricia insisted on preparing his meals or administering his medication herself. As I reviewed it all, a horrifying picture emerged. My father hadn't just been financially exploited. He had been systematically isolated and, possibly, medically abused. The question that haunted me was whether Patricia had merely taken advantage of his illness or if she had actively accelerated his decline. With trembling hands, I packed the evidence into my bag. Dad had given me everything I needed to challenge Patricia. Now I just had to find the right moment to use it. The day of the will reading arrived. I hadn't been officially notified, but my father's old friend, Walter Bennett, who had been Dad's lawyer for decades before Patricia had him inexplicably dismissed 3 months prior, had tipped me off to the time and place. "Something's rotten about this whole situation, Amber," Walter had told me over coffee the day before. "Robert would never have cut me out of his final arrangements. And changing lawyers after a 30-year friendship? It makes no sense." I arrived at the offices of Harrison and Powell promptly at 2 o'clock. The receptionist looked surprised when I gave my name. "Miss Mitchell, you aren't on the list for this meeting," she said, after checking her computer. "I am Robert Mitchell's daughter. I am to be present for the reading of his will." I kept my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. She made a phone call, speaking in a low voice, then directed me to wait. A few minutes later, Gregory Harrison himself emerged from the conference room. "Miss Mitchell, this is a bit awkward, but the reading has already begun. Mrs. Mitchell indicated that you were aware you would not be party to the proceedings." I held my ground. "As Mr. Mitchell's daughter, I have a right to be present, regardless of the will's contents." Harrison looked uncomfortable, but reluctantly assented. "Very well, please follow me." When I entered the conference room, Patricia's face flashed from shock to anger and finally to a serene smugness. Mason and Lindsay sat on either side of her, along with Patricia's brother and her personal assistant. "What is she doing here?" Patricia demanded, not even looking at me directly. "As Mr. Mitchell's daughter, Miss Mitchell has requested to be present," Harrison explained. Patricia gave a theatrical sigh. "This meeting is for the named heirs of the will only, which Amber is not. Robert was very clear about his wishes." The calm certainty in her voice made my blood boil, but I maintained my composure. I hadn't come this far to lose control now. "I understand you're grieving, Patricia, but I have a right to hear my father's wishes directly, even if he did choose to disinherit me." My voice was level, betraying none of the turmoil inside. Harrison seemed relieved by my reasonable tone. "Perhaps we can proceed. As I was saying, the will dated January 15th of this year stipulates that the entire estate of Robert Mitchell, with the exception of specific personal items listed in Appendix A, is to be transferred to his wife, Patricia Mitchell, with her children, Mason and Lindsay Winters, as secondary beneficiaries." Patricia shot me a triumphant look, which I met with a small, knowing smile that seemed to unsettle her. Harrison continued reading through the document, detailing the vast estate my father had built. The family home valued at $2.8 million. His company shares valued at approximately $12 million. Investment portfolios, vacation properties, and several personal collections of art and antiques. When he finished, Patricia placed a hand over her heart. "Robert always took care of us. He knew what was best for the family." "Any questions?" Harrison asked, looking around the room. I reached into my handbag and withdrew the sealed document Eleanor had given me. "Actually, I believe there has been a mistake." All eyes turned to me as I stood and walked to Harrison's position at the head of the table. I placed the document before him. "What is this?" he asked, frowning at the unfamiliar law firm's seal. "This is my father's most recent last will and testament, signed and filed with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts 6 months ago." Patricia leaped to her feet. "That's ridiculous. Robert would have told me if he'd updated his will." Harrison examined the document carefully, breaking the seal and reading the first few pages. His expression shifted from skepticism to concern. "This appears to be a legally executed will, dated more recently than the one we were just discussing. It bears Mr. Mitchell's signature, which I recognize, and proper witness attestations." He looked at Patricia. "Mrs. Mitchell, were you aware of this document?" The color drained from Patricia's face. "This is absurd. It must be a forgery." Harrison continued to scan the document. "It contains a clause that specifically revokes all prior wills and codicils. If this is authentic, it supersedes the will we were just reviewing." "Read it," I said softly. Harrison cleared his throat and began to read. The new will painted a very different picture of my father's wishes. Patricia and her children were granted modest trust funds that would pay them a reasonable allowance, but gave them no control over the principal. The family home was to be sold, with the proceeds going to establish a charitable foundation in my mother's name. The bulk of the estate, including controlling interest in the Mitchell Development Corporation, was left to me, with specific instructions to continue my father's legacy of ethical development and charitable giving. The most damning clause came near the end. Should my death occur under circumstances that might be deemed suspicious or premature, I direct my executor to authorize a full investigation, including toxicology reports and a review of all my medical care in the months preceding my death. Patricia's face twisted in a mask of rage. This is a lie, a complete fabrication. She turned to her children. Tell them your father would never do this to us. Mason looked stunned, while Lindsay began to cry dramatically. Harrison held up a hand. Mrs. Mitchell, please. This document bears a notary's seal and witnesses. It appears to have been filed with the state. If you wish to contest it, we will need to go through the proper legal channels. Contest it? I'll destroy it. Robert loved me. He would never have done this behind my back. Patricia's carefully maintained composure had completely evaporated. That ungrateful girl turned him against me, after everything I did for him. Her brother tried to calm her, but she violently shrugged him off. Mrs. Mitchell, Harrison said firmly, I must advise you that outbursts of this nature will not help your position should you choose to contest this will. The language here is quite clear, and there are further sealed instructions regarding potential investigations into Mr. Mitchell's death. At the mention of investigations, Patricia froze. Her eyes darted toward the door as if she were calculating an escape route. I remained calm, watching the scene unfold exactly as my father had predicted. Patricia, I think we both know that Dad saw you for who you are in the end. This is his final message to you. You don't know anything, she hissed. Your father was a confused old man. He didn't know what he was signing. Harrison, now visibly uncomfortable with the turn the conversation had taken, cut in. I believe we should adjourn this meeting until we can verify the authenticity of this new document, though I must note that it appears to be in order, and the firm listed is reputable. Verify? There's nothing to verify. I'm his wife. Patricia frantically gathered her belongings. This meeting is over. My lawyer will be in touch. She stormed toward the door, pausing only to spit one last thing at me. This isn't over, Amber. Her children followed her out, Mason giving me one unreadable look before he left. The room was silent after their departure. Harrison let out a long sigh. Miss Mitchell, I apologize for the confusion. I had no knowledge of this updated will. I understand, I said. My father anticipated Patricia's actions. That's why he took precautions. As I gathered my things, I felt a strange sense of calm. Dad had reached out from beyond the grave to protect me and expose Patricia's true nature. The battle was far from over, but the first decisive victory was mine. The immediate aftermath of the will reading was chaos. Patricia refused to vacate the family home as required by the newly discovered will, changing the security codes and instructing the staff not to admit me under any circumstances. My phone filled with scathing text messages from her, alternating between threats and attempts to gaslight me about my father's state of mind when he signed the new will. Her brother, whom I had never trusted, left menacing voicemails suggesting I should back off before things got worse. I checked out of my hotel and moved to another under a false name, unsettled by the intensity of Patricia's reaction. The next day, I met with Caroline Lawson, an attorney who specialized in contested wills and estate fraud. Your father was smart, Caroline said after reviewing the documents. By creating the new will with an independent firm and filing it with the state, he established a solid legal position. Patricia can contest it, but she'll have to prove he wasn't of sound mind when he signed it. He knew exactly what he was doing, I assured her. The question is, how far did Patricia go? These medical records suggest she may have been tampering with his medication. Caroline's expression turned serious. If our suspicions were true, we were looking at potential criminal charges, not just a contested will. Proving it, however, would be another matter entirely. Our strategy was twofold: enforce my father's final wishes while simultaneously gathering more evidence of Patricia's misdeeds. Caroline filed an emergency motion to freeze the estate's assets and have Patricia removed as executor, citing the new will's unambiguous language and the damning contents of the safe. In response, Patricia launched a vicious smear campaign. To anyone in my father's social circle who would listen, she spun a tale of a manipulative daughter, preying on a grieving, declining man. Ember always resented me, she'd lament to his golf buddies. She couldn't stand that Robert found happiness after her mother died. She poisoned him against us. The irony of her choice of words was not lost on me. A week after the reading, I came back to my hotel to find the door slightly ajar. My heart hammered against my ribs. I called security before I dared to step inside. The room had been tossed, not violently but methodically, with a chilling precision. Drawers were open, my suitcase rifled through. What sent a true bolt of fear through me was the discovery that the copies of my father's medical records were gone. Thankfully, the originals were safe elsewhere. The hotel's security footage was useless. A man in a maintenance uniform, his face conveniently obscured from the camera's view. The manager offered profuse apologies, a new room, and a promise of heightened security, but the message had been sent. That night, a text from an unexpected source lit up my phone. It was Mason. Need to talk. Not with Mom. Plaza Cafe, 10 a.m. tomorrow. My first instinct was to suspect a trap, but a sliver of curiosity won out. I agreed, choosing the bustling cafe for its anonymity and arriving early to scope it out. Mason showed up alone, looking haggard, the conflict warring in his eyes. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he confessed, his voice low after he ordered a coffee. "Mom's. She's unraveling, drinking around the clock, making these desperate phone calls. I saw her burning documents in the backyard." My focus sharpened. "Burning documents? What kind?" He gave a helpless shrug. "Financial papers, I think. She shooed me and Lindsay away when she caught us watching. But that's not all." He hesitated, then met my gaze. "I found pills in her bathroom. Prescription bottles. Your dad's name was on them, but the labels were half scratched off." A chill snaked down my spine. "Mason," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Do you realize what that implies?" He looked down at his hands, his expression wretched. "I'm not stupid, Ember, but she's my mother. Robert was good to us, though. If she did something to him..." He couldn't bring himself to say the words. "You have to go to the police," I insisted. "I can't," he said, fear plain on his face. "But I won't lie for her, not if it comes to that." As Mason stood to leave, he paused. "Lindsay wants to talk to you, too. She's even more torn up than I am. Mom's always had her on a tight leash. But Lindsay, she genuinely loved Robert." 2 days later, I found myself across a table from Lindsay in a quiet, out-of-the-way cafe. Her usual impeccable appearance was gone, replaced by a disheveled woman with eyes puffy and red from crying. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice raw. "The will. Was Mom really cut out?" "Not completely," I said gently. "Dad established trusts for you and Mason. You'll be provided for. It's just not the windfall she was anticipating." A muscle in her jaw twitched. "She promised me the beach house," she whispered, staring at the table. "She said it would be mine after Robert was gone." The words hung in the air, and she looked up, horrified at what she'd just admitted. "Lindsay, when did she start saying things like that?" "I don't know. Maybe a year ago?" She began shredding a paper napkin. "She kept talking about afterwards. I just assumed she meant after he retired. I never thought she meant..." She trailed off, unable to voice the terrible conclusion. I reached across the table, but she recoiled as if burned. "I have to go. She'll find out I was here." As she hurried away, a wave of sympathy washed over me, eclipsing my resentment. They were Patricia's children, molded by her greed and her lies. In their own way, they were victims too. The situation escalated dramatically the following week. Patricia crashed a charity gala my father had championed for years, making a scene the moment she saw me speaking with board members. "There she is!" she shrieked, her voice echoing across the ballroom as she pointed a trembling finger at me. "The daughter who abandoned her father for years, only to swoop in and steal his money." Security escorted her out, her stream of accusations trailing behind her. The incident was splashed across the local society pages, casting an unwelcome spotlight on our already fraught situation. That night, the anonymous threats began. First, a text from a blocked number. "Back off or you'll regret it." Then an email containing photos of me coming and going from my new hotel, a clear message that I was being watched. I reported everything to the police and to Caroline, who moved to expedite our legal proceedings. We soon learned Patricia had retained a notorious probate lawyer, a man with a reputation for scorched earth tactics, known for dragging out cases until the other side bled money and hope. "She's stalling," Caroline explained, "trying to make this so ugly and expensive that you'll be forced to settle." But Patricia had underestimated both my resolve and my father's foresight. Sifting through his personal files, I found research he'd commissioned on Patricia's past. The private investigator's report was shocking. Patricia hadn't been married once before, as she claimed, but twice. Her first husband, a wealthy, older man, had died of sudden heart failure just 3 years into their marriage. Patricia had inherited everything, leaving his children from a previous marriage with nothing. The parallels to my father's situation were unnerving. Even more damning, Caroline's investigator confirmed that Patricia's supposed ex-husband, Mason and Lindsay's father, had never actually divorced her. They had staged their separation while secretly maintaining their relationship, a fact corroborated by the surveillance photos from the safe. The web of deceit was far more tangled than even my father had realized. Patricia wasn't just a gold digger. She was a professional predator with a clear pattern of targeting and isolating wealthy older men. The question that kept me awake at night was whether she had simply waited for my father to die, or if she had expedited the process. The police finally became directly involved when Patricia violated the temporary restraining order I'd secured. She cornered me at a restaurant where I was dining with Eleanor, screaming accusations and trying to lunge at me before staff intervened. The responding officers took statements, and upon learning of the court order, their demeanor shifted. As they escorted Patricia away, I overheard one officer murmur to his partner that a faint chemical scent clung to her, like the inside of a pharmacy. The pieces were falling into place, but Patricia still had one last, desperate play. The preliminary hearing on the contested will was set for 3 weeks after the reading. The courtroom air was thick with tension as Caroline and I faced Patricia and her lawyer across the aisle. Mason sat grimly behind his mother. Lindsay was conspicuously absent. Judge Rio Alcoque, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, reviewed the docket. "Before we begin," she announced, her sharp gaze landing on Patricia, "I want to be clear that I have zero tolerance for the kind of behavior outlined in these reports. Harassment, intimidation, and the violation of court orders will not help your case in the slightest, Mrs. Mitchell." Patricia's lawyer, Martin Drake, rose smoothly. "Your Honor, my client denies all allegations of harassment. This is a family matter, a simple disagreement magnified by the raw emotions of grief." Judge Alcote was unmoved. "Save it for your arguments, Counselor. Let's address the matter of the conflicting wills." The proceedings began, with Drake arguing that the January will was valid, and the subsequent one was either a forgery or signed under duress. His case was polished, but thin on actual evidence. When it was Caroline's turn, she systematically dismantled his position. She presented affidavits from the new will's witnesses, the notary's confirmation, and the state's official registration. The most powerful testimony came from Walter Bennett, my father's longtime attorney. "Robert called me approximately 7 months ago," Walter testified. He expressed grave concerns about his wife's behavior and asked for a referral to an independent counsel. He wished to update his will without Mrs. Mitchell's knowledge. He was of perfectly sound mind and articulated his reasoning with absolute clarity. Patricia shot a venomous look at Walter, a man who had often been a guest in their home. He met her gaze without flinching. Robert told me he had discovered financial irregularities and was worried about the management of his medical care. He believed Patricia was deliberately isolating him from his daughter and his friends. Drake objected on the grounds of hearsay, but the judge allowed the testimony as evidence of my father's state of mind. The most stunning moment came when Mason requested to address the court. Patricia hissed for him to sit down, but he approached the witness stand. Under oath, he described finding the hidden prescription bottles, overhearing arguments between Patricia and her ex-husband about speeding things up, and witnessing Patricia physically block me from seeing my father in the hospital. "Robert was good to us," Mason finished, his voice thick with emotion. "He didn't deserve what happened to him, and Ember doesn't deserve what my mother is doing to her." Patricia's face was a mask of cold fury. By the time Drake called her to the stand, she had composed herself, expertly playing the part of the grieving widow. She spoke of my father's supposed mental decline, of my abandonment of him when I moved away, and of the happy, blended family I had torn apart with my jealousy. It was a masterful performance, but it crumbled under Caroline's cross-examination. Using the timeline my father had so carefully constructed, Caroline walked Patricia through specific dates and events, catching her in one contradiction after another. "Mrs. Mitchell, can you explain why you told this court you were with your husband constantly during his final days, yet your credit card records show you dining at Chez Maurice with a Mr. James Vinters the night before he passed?" Patricia stammered. That was a brief business meeting. James is my ex-husband. We were discussing the children." "The same ex-husband you claimed had abandoned you?" Caroline pressed. "The man you told Robert Mitchell you never wanted to see again?" "This is irrelevant," Drake interjected. "Your Honor," Caroline countered, "it speaks directly to Mrs. Mitchell's credibility and her pattern of deception." The judge agreed. Caroline continued her methodical dissection until Patricia was visibly flustered, her carefully constructed facade cracking under the pressure. After closing arguments, Judge Walcott recessed for only a few minutes before returning with her verdict. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds the will dated July 15th to be valid and enforceable. The prior will is hereby declared null and void. Mrs. Mitchell is removed as executor of the estate, and Ms. Ember Mitchell is appointed in her place as stipulated. A sharp gasp escaped Patricia's lips, and in that same moment, a wave of profound relief washed over me. But the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into potential elder abuse, fraud, and foul play. Mrs. Mitchell is ordered to vacate the family residence within 48 hours and to surrender all financial records pertaining to the late Mr. Mitchell's accounts." As we left the courthouse, a man in a trench coat approached us. "Ms. Mitchell? Detective Liam Connolly, Boston PD. I'd like to talk to you about your father's medical records." In the weeks that followed, the full, horrifying scope of Patricia's scheme came to light. The police investigation revealed that she had never legally divorced James Vinters, making her marriage to my father invalid. More chillingly, toxicology tests on preserved samples of my father's blood showed elevated levels of digoxin, a heart medication he had never been prescribed. Patricia's house of cards collapsed entirely when Lindsay, whether out of remorse or self-preservation, turned over a journal. In it, Patricia had meticulously logged my father's medication, making notes on which combinations left him most compliant and forgetful. Patricia was indicted on charges of fraud, elder abuse, and suspicion of manslaughter. James Vinters was charged as a co-conspirator. While the legal battles would take months, even years, to fully resolve, Patricia's reign of terror was over. The media coverage was a feeding frenzy. Headlines like "Black Widow Strikes Again" and "Daughter's Detective Work Uncovers Deadly Plot" turned our family tragedy into a public spectacle. I refused all interview requests, focusing instead on honoring my father's memory and rebuilding what Patricia had tried to destroy. As I began to sort through my father's things in the family home, now blessedly empty of Patricia's presence, I found treasures she had hidden away. Photos of my mother, long vanished from display. Letters they had written to each other when they were dating. Even my childhood art projects, which my father had carefully saved. In his study, behind a false panel in a bookshelf Patricia had apparently never found, was a collection of videos he had made over the years. Some were from my childhood. Others were more recent reflections on his life and his hopes for the future. The last one was dated just 2 months before he died. "Ember," he said, his face gaunt, but his eyes clear as he stared directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, then things have unfolded just as I feared. I want you to know I realized my mistake with Patricia, and I did everything I could to protect you and what we built together." He paused, emotion momentarily overwhelming him. "I should have trusted your instincts about her from the very beginning. You have your mother's wisdom. I hope you can forgive my foolishness." Tears streamed down my face as I watched. "I forgive you, Dad," I whispered to the screen. "Remember what matters," he continued. "Not the money or the properties, but the values we shared. Integrity, compassion, perseverance. That is your true inheritance, and no one can ever take it from you." In those moments, watching my father's final messages, I felt him with me again, not just in memory, but in spirit. Despite Patricia's efforts, she had failed to sever the bond between us. In the end, love and truth prevailed. 6 months after the courtroom confrontation with Patricia, I finally returned to my childhood home. The process of reclaiming the space was both painful and restorative. I had considered selling it, as the will specified, but after careful thought and consultation with the estate lawyers, I decided to keep the property. I would convert part of it into the headquarters for the Elizabeth Mitchell Foundation, named for my mother. The foundation, funded by a significant portion of my inheritance, would focus on supporting cancer research and providing resources for children who had lost parents to illness. It felt like the perfect way to honor both of my parents' legacies. As I wandered through the renovated rooms, memories of my childhood mingled with the scent of fresh paint and new furniture. I had removed most traces of Patricia's cold, modern aesthetic, restoring the warm, comfortable style my mother had originally created. Eleanor, who had stayed on at Mitchell Development through the transition, joined me for tea on the veranda that had always been my mother's favorite space. "Your father would be so proud," she said, taking in the transformation. "He was so worried near the end, not just about the money, but about his legacy being distorted." "Did he ever tell you what first made him suspicious of Patricia?" I asked. Eleanor nodded. "It was something small, really. He noticed her taking your mother's pictures off the nightstand when she thought he was asleep. When he confronted her, she claimed she was just dusting. But it made him think about other changes she'd made, about how isolated he'd become." We talked for hours about my father's last year, filling in the gaps in my understanding. Eleanor shared stories I'd never heard, including how my father had secretly kept in touch with many of his old friends, despite Patricia's efforts to cut him off. "He never stopped talking about you," she assured me. "Every achievement, every phone call, those were his brightest moments." The legal proceedings against Patricia were ongoing. She remained in custody, denied bail due to the severity of the charges and the substantial flight risk. Mason had agreed to testify against her in exchange for immunity from any accessory charges. Lindsay's situation was more complicated. Psychological evaluations suggested she had been severely manipulated by her mother her entire life, creating an unhealthy dependence. She was in therapy while staying with her biological father's sister. Despite their roles in the painful events surrounding my father's death, I couldn't bring myself to abandon Mason and Lindsay completely. They had also been victims of Patricia's manipulations, raised in an environment of lies and materialism. After much reflection, I set up college trust funds for them both, using a small portion of my inheritance. The trusts were structured to encourage education and independence, ideals my father had championed. Mason was already enrolled in community college, working to forge his own path, far from his mother's influence. The family home gradually filled with the items that had been put in storage when Patricia redecorated. Family heirlooms returned to their places of honor, including my grandmother's antique clock that always stood in the entryway, and the collection of model sailboats my father and I had built together over the years. 3 months after moving back, I hosted a memorial for my father at his favorite sailing club. Unlike the formal, impersonal funeral Patricia had arranged, this gathering was intimate and authentic. My father's oldest friends shared stories that made us laugh and cry, celebrating the man he truly was, not the sanitized version Patricia had presented to the world. Robert always said that a person's true wealth is measured by the lives they touch, not the assets they accumulate, one of his friends, Walter, said, raising his glass. By that measure, he was the richest man I ever knew. Listening to the stories, I realized how much of my father's life I still had to discover. Each person who spoke revealed facets of him I had never seen, deepening my understanding of the complex, generous man who had raised me. The healing process was neither quick nor linear. On some days, grief would overwhelm me without warning. On others, anger would flare at the thought of the precious final moments with my father that Patricia had stolen from me. The knowledge that she had deliberately hastened his death for financial gain was a wound that might never fully heal. Yet amidst the pain, I found unexpected gifts. The adversity had revealed my own strength and resilience. I had discovered allies in unlikely places and learned to trust my instincts, just as my father had advised me to do years ago. Most importantly, I had honored my father's last wishes, protecting the legacy he had worked so hard to build. As the seasons changed, I gradually established new routines and traditions. Sunday mornings, once reserved for sailing with my dad, became my time to volunteer with a grief support group for children. The holiday season, which I had dreaded facing without him, became an opportunity to host a gathering for others who had lost loved ones. One spring morning, as I sat in my father's study reviewing foundation proposals, I came across a quote he had framed on his desk. "The greatest inheritance a father can give his children is a few minutes of his time each day." Despite his success and wealth, his most valuable gift had always been his presence. That was the legacy I most wanted to honor in my own life, by giving my time and attention generously to the causes and people that mattered. The justice system finally delivered its verdict on Patricia. She was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The news brought a complex mix of emotions, not the triumphant satisfaction I might have expected, but a quieter sense that a final chapter had closed, and my father could truly rest in peace. I kept my promise to visit Mason and Lindsay occasionally, meeting them on neutral ground as they worked to build lives independent of their mother's toxic influence. These relationships remained complicated, but I remembered my father's capacity for forgiveness and tried to embody that spirit. Looking back on the turbulent journey, from that devastating phone call about my father's hospitalization to the peaceful life I was now building, I recognized how much I had grown. The grief had transformed me, burning away naivety and replacing it with wisdom. The betrayal had taught me to value authenticity and to recognize manipulation. The loss had deepened my appreciation for genuine connection. My father's final gift wasn't the inheritance Patricia had so desperately coveted. It had been the truth, painful but necessary. It was the chance to reclaim not just his assets, but his true legacy of integrity and compassion. Standing by my father's grave on the anniversary of his death, I placed white roses, his favorite, beside the headstone. "I kept my promise, Dad," I whispered. "Your story has been told. Your wishes have been honored. Your legacy lives on." The journey through grief and betrayal taught me that family isn't always defined by blood or legal ties. Sometimes it's forged through shared values, mutual respect, and genuine care. My father understood this truth in the end, making provisions based not on traditional definitions of family, but on the authentic bonds he cherished. That understanding has become my guiding principle. As I move forward, I carefully choose who I allow into my inner circle, now valuing character over charm, substance over appearance. The wealth my father left provides security, but it is the wisdom gained through our shared ordeal that proves most valuable in navigating life's complexities. If you have ever suffered betrayal within your family or found yourself fighting for what is rightfully yours, I hope my story offers some comfort and guidance. Trust your instincts, document everything, and never underestimate the power of the truth to eventually prevail. Family conflicts around inheritance can reveal people's true character, often in shocking ways. Have you experienced something similar? Or do you know someone who has? I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with others who might be facing similar challenges. Thank you for listening to my journey from betrayal to healing. Remember, sometimes the greatest strength comes from surviving our deepest wounds.